I think there's a big opportunity to recognize that it's not I, it's we. And it was my father that poured his heart and soul into me. It was my basketball coaches. It was my friends and neighbors. It was my extended family that stepped in a bigger way when I was 16. It was the community at large, some of which remained anonymous, that supported my brother and I in different ways. So I'm this consortium or collage board of those people. And I think it's important to also lean into I when you're wanting to push to that next level of I. But when I look back and I recognize my path, it's one of we. And I continue to always look at it that way.
Thank you for tuning in to the Mile 40 podcast. I am Bishoy Tadros, the author of Break Barriers and Audacious, both of which are sold on Amazon. And I invite you to join me as I engage with guests to discuss those bounce back moments that we encounter on our personal journey. Mile 40 is a forum to learn about how athletes, professionals, and leaders of all backgrounds stare down moments in life where the only option is to rise up. The Mile 40 podcast strives to remind listeners that the comeback is always greater than the setback. Welcome to the Mile 40 podcast. Thank you all for continuing to tune in. I am super excited. We are back in a studio, and that speaks to the fact that before this episode came to be, I had met the guest. He really impressed me for multiple reasons, and I said, well, if we're going to do this episode, we got to do it right. So before we tune in, if you haven't already, please be sure to hit subscribe. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, check out the show notes. Pick up a copy of Break Barriers or Audacious. I'll sign it, send it out. And now, without further ado, I have Albe Tremblay. He's a founding team member at Superpower, a fast-growing health tech company redefining what proactive, performance-driven healthcare looks like. His path to this work has been anything but conventional. Albe earned a full scholarship to USC, an early sign of the resilience and drive that would shape his journey. He began his career in consulting, but quickly realized he was meant for something different, building, not just advising. When he came across Superpower, he felt a deep alignment with its mission. Betting on both the company and himself, he made his first angel investment and soon after decided to fully dedicate himself to helping build it up from the ground up. Albe, thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Of course,
quite the introduction.
Of course. And as you know, that was just, to get us started here and get things kicking. But there's a lot more to your story that we're going to dive into today. I know I kind of gave the quick high-level overview of you as a founding team member of Superpower, but one of the things that really stood out for me was the fact that this was a decision that you made to join a company based off an angel investment that you made, which speaks to the fact that, you're a person that when you believe in something, you're okay going all in on it, but B, I also see a little bit of a risk taker in you. And I think that speaks to probably a little bit of a deeper side of you that we're going to dive into today. So why don't you give us a little bit of insight into where life kicked off for you? Where were you born?
I was born in the Bay Area.
Oh,
so
wow.
I grew up about an hour south of San Francisco at the foothills of the Santa Cruz Mountains in a smaller town called Saratoga. I spent most of my time there, had a unorthodox childhood, as we'll get into soon here, but got to grow up in the Bay with beautiful weather and wonderful people.
Well, let's dive right in. Talk to me a little bit about childhood.
So my childhood was anything but normal, and I now look at it and feel through it as the greatest gift I was ever given, which is a little bit of a contrarian view to have when we get into all of the things that the story points for me. I was, as I mentioned, born in the Bay to two biological parents that had kind of fumbled their way into my childhood. They wanted kids, but it was timing and figuring all those pieces out. So my first 5 or 6 years of life were pretty tumultuous. Not to say that I remember them, right? Sure. I definitely don't recall all the different pieces. And they shortly separated when I was about 6 years old, right? So dad went one way, mom went another way. And for the next 5 or so years, split my time between mom and dad. Dad being a general contractor, running his own business, remodeling kitchens and baths, as he would always say, and mom finding jobs here and there to make things work. When I was about 10, 11 years old is when we started spending all of our time with our father. So my father was a very stable, consistent, loving, empathetic person, and really dedicated himself to my younger brother and I at that point in time. I have one full biological younger brother, Corey, among a smattering of other siblings who I call brother and sister now, as we'll get into as we get down this road. And those next 5 years, from 10 or 11 to about 16, were extremely stable, right? While we maybe had a single parent, my father fully dedicated himself to my brother and I. While he was a sole proprietor of this contracting business, he was always around. He was at every sports game. He drove us everywhere. It was pretty much, I work so that I can provide, and my other full-time job is Corey and Albe, my brother. And that went really well, right? We went through the middle school thing, and I was figuring all the things out, getting my license, right, permit at 15 and a half, and, just like stumbling my way through it. But it was pretty a normal, average childhood. Like, I didn't know anything else. And that suddenly changed when I lost my father when I was 16. And he suddenly passed in a motorcycle accident. And that is, when you ask me that question of when did life start, that is one story point I think about when life started or life changed and a new life started for me, right? When my father passed, I had just turned 16. It was about a month after that birthday. I had just gotten my license, right? I was driving a 2002 Silver Bullet, Toyota Tacoma stick shift, just getting it figured out. I'll never forget the day my dad pulled up and he said, "Oh, hey, I got this car for you," which was wonderful. And at that point, there was this transition from adolescence, right, straight into adulthood. Whether I wanted it or not, it was thrust upon me, right? I was now the head of the household. We didn't have all that much family around, or immediate family around on my father's side. Most were from the East Coast. And then my mom's side was nearby, and we were connected with them, but they weren't involved in our day-to-day life. So when you ask me that question of when did life start, that's when a new life started for me. And all of a sudden I was making decisions for our household. What are we going to do with this home? All our things. Where am I now going to high school? Where's my brother going to school? And all at the same time, trying to figure out, what does it mean to be 16, right? You layer those things together. And so I won't get too far down the road because I'm sure there's other questions that you have, but that's the story points of what childhood was for me. Childhood really, it ended a lot earlier than 16, but it definitely ended when I was 16 and lost my father.
So between the ages of 10 and 16, or 11 and 16, when with your father, was your mom fairly out of the picture, or?
She was.
Yeah.
My mother wasn't involved in our childhood from 11 to 16 on a day-to-day basis. There were moments in time where she'd try to engage, but that wasn't necessarily something that, at least at the time, we viewed as productive.
Yeah.
So she would attempt to engage, but it wasn't consistent throughout those years. It was really just us three, my dad, me, and my brother Corey. And my dad would always say, "It's just us three. We have just us three."
I think there's a lot to take away from that set of circumstances. And when you look back at those 5 years with your dad, and how old was your brother?
My brother's a year and a half younger.
He's a year and a half younger than you. And when you think about, that period of your life, and you reflect on how quickly you had to navigate things once he passed, what I hear from you is he did everything he had to do to step up during those 5 years as a father. And I feel like, in a way, that kind of taught you more than any sort of verbal lessons could have taught you. Especially because at that age, you probably couldn't understand, the first 11 years of your life, and what got your dad to this situation where he had to, lead you to, in a way. So you kind of made it seem like he passed. Obviously, it was probably tragic for you, but it also sounds like the first thing that came to your mind was your newfound responsibility, and I'm sure you can't help but think about that when you're in that scenario. But talk to me a little bit about the grieving process that you had to go through and navigate.
So for me, when like you said, when my father passed at 16, it was immediate go mode. I mean,
Yeah.
it wasn't more than 48 hours that I had support from my mother's side of the family, who was wonderful
Sure.
and stepped in with open arms and an open heart to help my brother and I. And what that meant was, let's go through the paperwork. What are all the passwords to the accounts?
Sure.
How do we start doing all the legal proceedings and the
Yeah.
guardianship and all of the logistics?
Yeah.
And as the center and now nexus of this group of three,
Yeah.
that's now a group of two, there was no
Yeah.
choice to grieve.
Yeah.
Or at least that's how I think about it in my mind. I'm sure there was a
Sure.
choice I could have made to,
Yeah.
but there was no moment. It was right away, hey, Albe, you have the answers. You're now the decision maker of like, well, are we keeping this item or are we donating this item? Are we doing that? How do we log into Charles Schwab, right? How do we do this thing? We need to cancel your summer vacation. How do you do that? Are you staying at Saratoga High School, right? And so the grieving process for me of losing my father is something that has happened over the course of the past 10 or 11 years and has bubbled up.
Yeah.
Right. So in the first 2 or 3 years, it was bubbling, right?
Yeah.
Where there'd be these kind of bubbles that would emerge in moments that I didn't expect them to, of starting to handle and process those emotions. I'm of the mind that it's a thing I will always hold with me.
Yeah.
And sometimes when I hear the word grieving, I think, it's a box to be checked, or it's like, okay, I went through the grieving process and that door is closed, right?
Yeah.
Not saying that you're suggesting that, but in my mind, that's something that always comes up. And I think, well, I'll always be grieving that loss. And I'll always also be remembering that love, right? And so for me, the grieving process, was halted immedately by the needing to step up into this new role, which my father and other mentors to me throughout my life enabled me to even start to think to understand what that looked like.
Yeah.
And from there on out, it's been different phases of grieving, right? My grieving process when I was 18 was losing my father figure. My grieving process at 25 was losing a not friend, but man figure, right? And I've kind of grieved the loss of not having my biological father around as another man to look to in all these processes of being in your 20s and figuring life out. So there's different like stages, and I'm sure someone would say, there's all these different stages to grieving, but that's what my grieving process was. It's something I think I still continue to work through.
Yeah, I can only imagine. Absolutely. I mean, as is the case with nearly every guest, it's impossible for me to put myself in your shoes, but I can only imagine what you had to navigate. And I would assume that it's an ongoing process, and it's something that comes up repeatedly over the course of your lifetime in different experiences you have with different people. And what I'm trying to wrap my head around is the fact that at an early age, you were in a bit of a dysfunctional situation, and then you had to kind of define the role of parent, and then you had the role of parent for 5 years, and the truth be told, that like at 16, you're still not really right. Like, look, I'm almost 40, and I still, look at my parents, thankfully, as people that play a significant role in my life and like showing me how to live, and I can't imagine at 16 being in that situation. And the question that perhaps is foreshadowing, where this is going is, how quick was there a yearning for a parental figure upon losing your dad? And once that yearning kind of started to come about, how confident were you in allowing someone else to even try to fill that void?
It's a great question. I don't know if there was ever much of a yearning. My father from 11 to 16 was a very present father and engaged father, but not necessarily a controlling father. And he would allow me to ride my bike to the mall,
Sure.
called Valley Fair, for 30 minutes, and I'm gone all day long. And he trusted me of like, oh, you're just hanging out with friends. And so not to say I didn't have a parental figure, but I didn't have one that was so engaged from a control and life design perspective that in losing him, I would lose that control and life design, and then therefore maybe yearn for that structure that he imparted upon me.
Sure.
So the yearning for a parental figure was more one that came from yearning a safety, just yearning. Oh, someone else has got this figured out.
Sure.
Right. And I didn't realize that until about a year in, that my dad made me feel safe.
Yeah.
He made me feel like things were figured out, and he made spaces out of nothing that I didn't have to do. And so that yearning came up over time in terms of the logistical pieces of being like, well, I don't have a dad to bring to this event,
Sure.
or I don't. So things would definitely present themselves that way. And I'm sure we'll get into this, but I also had immediately, my aunt and uncle from my mother's side, a really supportive community that came in and swaddled me, if you will, with love and care. So I didn't even really feel that yearning because I had that immediately from my biological family, and then the community as well.
You brought up safety, and I guess that's a really good word to use here. And the question is, did you feel emotionally safe with the support of that extended family? Or, because there's a huge difference between emotionally safe and safe in the context of, they gave us a roof and a bed and, allowed us to have a place to have dinner.
I did. Well, I felt deeply emotionally safe, and still do, with my aunt and uncle, Barb and Gary, immediately. Right? They were part of my life from day zero, and I didn't even know it, and involved. Right? They have two kids who are our cousins. We would celebrate holidays with them. So they showed up in a way that I am consistently and eternally grateful for.
Yeah.
And, knew my father very well. And so immediately I was definitely emotionally safe with those two people in my life.
Okay.
And still different from how I was emotionally safe with my father.
Yeah.
But they did provide that for my brother and I in a deeply selfless way.
Was there any period, leading up to his passing where, you got into any sort of trouble or, had to kind of battle through a certain internal conflict?
I definitely got into a little bit of hot water here and there, whether it was with him or otherwise, right? And kind of the normal childhood things here and there. And my relationship with my father was one that was demarcated by some of those moments, right? Especially being 16 and leaning into all of that. There's one moment that does come to mind, right? I grew up playing basketball. It was a huge part of my identity. I ended up going on to coach basketball a little bit in my community. And my dad, being as present as he was at all of my basketball games.
Yeah.
And so he'd show up and he'd watch, and I'd be playing on the court and super engaged with it. And I'm, 13, 14, 15 years old. And him wanting to be helpful, he would turn into parent coach, right? As he doing, we'd be on our car ride back in our Toyota Sequoia, and he'd be like, well, and he was just like I am now. And I think he's imparted this upon me, and I've learned this from him. Always focused on the areas for improvement.
Of course.
Right? Where like the areas, you did so great, that's awesome. But now I've always been focused on, okay, where can I improve?
That's where you could perfect it.
That's where the action is, right? I think it's awesome to celebrate the things you did well, but focus on the areas for improvement, because that's where you can make the difference. And so he would focus on, this look this way, and this look that way, and this look this way. And that's where we would, that's where there was that conflict of like, I don't want you to now I think about it. I'm not sure I thought this in the moment, but I was like, I don't know if I want you to show up as coach. I want you to show up as dad.
Yeah.
And I think that that's maybe where that, missing mother figure also would have come in, and maybe how I think about it traditionally done the, oh wow, you did so great, and there was that missing balance sometimes of the dad coach and maybe the mom love that he brought in a beautiful way in his own way, but it couldn't necessarily be fully replicated.
Yeah.
So when I think about struggle or conflict between my father and I, it was always one of him really expressing love in his own way and me not interpreting it as love at the age I was, and seeing it as him being engaged and involved and thinking about me and how I can be better. I obviously just viewed it as like, I don't agree with you and I don't think that's right. And the classic 13-year-old response.
No, I mean, like, look, I get this 1,000% because, my mother was like that. My mother is like that. And I am now, like, my wife calls me out on it all the time, because not with our kids, but even in a relationship with friends or peers or my wife, like, I'm constantly looking at those areas of improvement without being able to, high level, just take a second and be like, well, like, you did all these amazing things. So now I have to, like, consciously, go out of my way to make sure that I celebrate the wins before I call out the areas of improvement. And I got to bite my tongue sometimes on the areas of improvement. But I get it. I mean, like, that's definitely something that's hard for a lot of parents to reconcile. And I don't think I fully grasped it until I became a parent, because you start to realize, like, you're repeating the cycle. You're starting to realize that, and it's cool that you're not a parent and you're able to kind of see it ahead of time, and I'm sure you kind of see it in your day to day, as you're in a position that probably requires a lot of feedback and a lot of honest conversations, and so that's it's always funny how things come full circle, like, right? And in the moment, it's hard to appreciate it. All right. So all that being said, now let's kind of pick up from 16 after he passed away. What happened?
After he passed away, I was immediately in this logistical barrage storm of, all right, we need to get things figured out. It's the summer in between my sophomore and junior year of high school, and I'm starting high school. I'm in the middle of a summer basketball season. So there's that logistical piece. Got to figure that out. There's moving homes. There's making it into my junior year of high school. So immediately that barrage happens. After that barrage is settled down and my family, all from my mother's side, all came together to help us, I was immediately thrust into my junior year of high school. And so my aunt and uncle, who became our legal guardians on my mother's side, lived in Gilroy.
Okay.
And for you, if you're not
Sure.
familiar with the Bay Area, for those that aren't, that's about, with no traffic, about 45 minutes south of where I was growing up.
Okay.
And with traffic in the mornings on Highway 101 is an hour and a half sometimes.
Okay. Got it.
And so all of a sudden I was commuting on a daily basis from Gilroy into Saratoga High School. And as you can imagine, on Highway 101, driving my 2002 Toyota Tacoma stick shift in the mornings, blasting music, being 16 years old, was very different to what the rest of my immediate peers and friends in this community were experiencing, right? Saratoga is a relatively affluent community, and most of my peers are getting rides to school in a great way and have that, mechanism for themselves. And I'm here coming in, 30 minutes late because there was traffic on Highway 101, in a Tacoma truck. And it was very different. I was immediately, there was this massive chasm of my life versus the lives of all of my friends. Right. And there wasn't, the biggest challenge there for me was, I couldn't relate. Right. And they couldn't relate. And not on either one of us, but we were having very different experiences. Right. Where I was trying to figure out who I am and what my identity is and how do I fit in this community and how do I get to class on time. Right. And I'll never forget how wonderful my high school was for accommodating me in this time and allowing me space, and
Sure.
they were wonderful.
Yeah.
And as a quick aside, a week after my father had passed, my high school principal, Paul Robinson, I'll never forget this, was at my door, with a letter and open arms. That was one of the most, over the summer,
Sure.
one of the most beautiful things I've seen an educator and role model do.
Yeah.
And so immediately there was this big chasm between my experience and that of my community. So I was kind of feeling my way through that. All the while, I was on the basketball team. I had a part-time job at a tuxedo and suit shop, tuxedo warehouse. And I had late nights, right? Being on these teams and captain of this and that. And so I started trying to find what I was calling home bases.
Yeah.
Where I could sleep for the night.
Sure.
Right? Such that I didn't have to commute all the way back down to Gilroy and all the way back up. There was the gas and the time and all of that.
Yeah.
And a lot of people from the community, it being a relatively affluent one, had reached out and had offered this and said, we have a bed or we have this opportunity, and you're always welcome to stay with us. And so on Tuesday and Thursday nights when I had basketball practice, I would go to one of those home bases.
Sure.
And most of them were friends, and I would, sleep at my friend Arnav's house or my friend Amir's house, or these friends who were wonderful at hosting me.
Yeah.
And I'd have my duffel bag and my truck parked out front, and I'd make the bed, maybe have breakfast with them, and hustle out to my truck like I was never there.
Yeah.
Get to school, and this time I was on time for school for once because I was staying nearby. And that was my life for a while. For my first semester of that junior year of high school, it was this kind of couch surfing, figuring out what is this going to look like. Oh, by the way, I have to apply to college at the same time and figure out that next step. And who is this person in all of that? And through that home base process, if you want to call it, I started staying, a night here, a night there with a family that I had, known and gone to high school with their daughter. And it, started off as a Tuesday night, and I'd park my truck up top and mosey my way on down, and no one would ever know I was there, and escape in the morning with my duffel bag and make my bed. And then it started slowly evolving into, Tuesday and Wednesday night. And then, well, why don't you pull your car down? And then, why don't you come up and have dinner? And why don't you use our kitchen like it's yours? And go on family vacation with us? And this kind of natural adoption process. The joke I always make is it was kind of I was like a feral cat. I had to kind of get used to. I was creeping around. Get used to eating out of the bowl in the house, and then getting used to laying on the bed. And it was kind of the same process. I was this 16-year-old kid that was trying to figure it out, and they had given me and opened this container that allowed me to do that in my own comfortable way. And we were both feeling our way through it.
Out of curiosity, because again, it's such a unique circumstance, what about your brother? Where was he at this time?
So with my brother being a year and a half younger than me, which he was significantly younger than me in terms of the roles we played in our lives, right? I as the oldest sibling, stepped up into that second parent role. Yeah. And that caused a big developmental difference between the two of us. Not to say that one is better than the other, I'm so great for stepping up. We just had different roles in this group of three. And so when this originally happened, I said to someone in my family, I really want my brother to stay in the community, involved in the community, and that means attending the middle school there. And I think, for the best, it was decided that he would stay in Gilroy. And my aunt and uncle were and continue to be some of the most beautiful, heartfelt humans in welcoming in Corey to their nucleus, which I was a part of at some time, but having then had roots in Saratoga in a deeper way. Just where I was with my life in my high school, I spent my time there, and he spent a lot of his time in Gilroy.
All right, so we'll go back to that because I'm interested in how things kind of played out there. So now we go back to this family, right? You're getting situated. You're starting to feel more and more comfortable, and this is obviously leading up to a situation where it becomes a little bit more permanent. Was it like a hey, like we need to have a talk, like we'd love to invite you into our family officially, or how'd that play out?
There were multiple moments. I would say
Yeah.
it was a smattering of moments and conversations that I remember.
Yeah.
Right. And kind of some of the story points I touched around on, like, we want you to use our
Yep.
kitchen like it's yours. And there were also natural, like, 16-year-old moments of, well, can my girlfriend come over? And
Yeah.
like, they're just natural things that, like,
Yeah.
life moments that presented themselves of, like, oh, well, I'm going to prom, and
Yeah.
that started, like, not forcing those conversations, but they came up in a beautiful, fun,
Yeah.
joyful way. So there were those moments of us feeling out, what does this look like, and what does this mean? And I didn't know, and nobody knew, right?
Yeah.
This wasn't something that either of us planned. It kind of
Yeah.
just happened, and we've kind of fumbled our way into this beautiful situation.
Were you a trusting individual? Like, was it easy for you to trust, a new set of adults? Like, even if they were offering you, again, food and shelter and space, and again, there is still this idea of emotional safety of, like, can I really trust these people? Like, do they want anything from me? Is this more beneficial for them than it is for me, one way or the
Oh,
other?
I wholeheartedly trusted and continue to trust them. I
Yeah.
think that is both obviously a result of who I am, which I wouldn't say I'm always actually a default trusting person.
Yeah.
In this case, I think it's more of a result of who they are
Yeah.
and the ways they showed up
Yeah.
that immediately allowed me to lean into trust there. So at no moment did I ever feel unsafe. I mean, I actually felt emotionally safe with them quite quickly.
Yeah.
And so no, there was never any moment where I didn't trust them, or I was confused about
Like,
incentives
what was going
or
on? Yeah.
what was going on, or anything like that. Because it really started off as a warm bed to stay in, and a place to put my car, and that's where it started. And it, from my perspective, it kind of naturally just brambled its way into this relationship, and this parent-child, part of the nucleus relationship over time. It was a really natural evolution. I think that neither of us really knew was the intention, or at least I didn't. I can't speak for them, but
Yeah.
I didn't at 16. I had no idea. I was just like, oh, I was kind of just living day by day.
Yeah.
I was like, how do I just get to school and put gas in my car?
Yeah.
Right. That was a big new thing that we don't have to get into. Was just, that's how I kind of got into the whole business world and entrepreneurship, was the logistical challenge of putting gas in my car. That was the first, you talk about jobs to do. That was the first job to do.
Wow. So, wow, it's a lot to think about. Were there, if I think about between the ages of 16 to 18, before you head off to college, this sounds like it played out the best possible way after a very unfortunate set of circumstances. But were there any moments of, you're not really my dad, you're not really my mom? Like, did you have to navigate that at all?
No, there was never a moment where there was never a pushback on that. I think there was this beautiful evolution, and welcoming. I think we were both feeling our way through it, but there was never like a pushback of, you're not this or you're not that, or any, visceral reaction to it. We just kind of fumbled our way into it, and they held me with open arms.
That's amazing. I mean, it's so beautiful to hear, because it doesn't always work out this way for people. And so to hear that, and to be with you in the flesh, to kind of speak through it, is really special. Because I think one of the things that your journey is doing is it's shining a light on, the elements of humanity that exist that maybe we don't hear about, or we don't see, and that we don't know. And, I'm and people like that aren't necessarily, put on poster boards or, highlighted, in mainstream media for essentially changing your life.
Right.
And I think it's fair to say you wouldn't be the person you are today without their influence.
Oh, 100%. I mean, I often think at times when I see someone who is conventionally successful, there is a faction of those people, for better or worse, that leans into I. I did this, I accomplished this, and I think those things are true, by the way. And I think there's a big opportunity to recognize that it's not I. It's we. And it was my father that poured his heart and soul into me. It was my basketball coaches. It was my friends and neighbors. It was my extended family that stepped in a bigger way when I was 16. It was the community at large, some of which remained anonymous, that supported my brother and I in different ways. It was a lot of my teachers in high school, right? I had 3 to 5 teachers in my life that were very involved in my life in a kind of an unorthodox way and supported me through it. And then it was my adoptive parents and siblings, the new siblings there, that helped me become who I am today. So I'm this consortium or collage board of those people. And I think it's important to also lean into I when you're wanting to push to that next level of I. But when I look back and I recognize my path, it's one of we. And I continue to always look at it that way.
Hey, Mile 40 fam. I get asked a lot about my training programs and how I set myself up for success to cross finish lines all over the world. Well, I'm going to let you in on a secret. Recovery is half the battle. And in order to get that recovery, I rely on clean sources of protein. That's why my go-to protein shake is Owen. Only what you need. I have one after every single workout. 100% vegan and plant-based, Owen's plant-based shakes use a multi-source protein blend of pea, pumpkin seed, and flax seeds to include all essential amino acids to promote optimal daily health. Uncompromised taste. Owen brings together the essential elements of advanced nutrition, amazingly clean ingredients, functional superiority, and uncompromised taste. Now go ahead, go to www.liveowen.com. That's spelled LIVEOWYN.com. Use code MILE40 for 20% off your next purchase. Only what you need. Were you self-aware when you were younger?
Yes, I was self-aware. In some ways more self-aware than others, or I like to think, but there's a little bit of a contrast in saying I was self-aware. So yes, I was pretty self-aware. I think others helped me be self-aware, build self-awareness, because they teach you about what their awareness is of you, and then that becomes a reflection of self. So I think so. Although I don't think I was self-aware such that I understood the context I was operating in. Because I was so busy, like as an analogy, I was so busy in a beautiful way running around the track that I wasn't sitting up in the stands.
Yeah.
And I didn't necessarily see in relation to
where you were going,
where I was going and who I was next to, and oh wait, I'm running this way and someone else is running that way. Because if I look back at, especially my first, really, let's call it 16 to 18 years, they were significantly different. But I just don't even, because I experienced them myself, I didn't have the awareness necessarily at the time to realize, wow, this is really different.
Well, I mean, that kind of leads me to, did you carry the weight of any insecurities?
Absolutely.
And like specifically, like what would you say were some of your insecurities during
Absolutely.
that period?
I think there was insecurity around the lack of parental figures, right? That's kind of a very logistical thing that would come up of, well, I don't have someone for Father's Day,
Sure.
Traditionally.
Yes.
I don't have someone to show up at this thing that's the mother-son event, so there were big insecurities around that. Big insecurities around not knowing exactly what my identity was, right? I was operating in a very affluent community and had also experienced things earlier in my life that were different from that.
Sure.
So there was kind of this straddling of this affluent Saratoga community along with an upbringing that was in conflict to some extent and when juxtaposed next to one another. So there's a lot of insecurity around who am I? Do I fit in here?
Do I belong here?
Do I belong
do
here?
I deserve this?
Yeah, do I deserve this? Is this why do I deserve all the support these people are giving me and love and compassion? And so that's the longer answer to the shorter of yes.
So when you think about the last 10 years now, like 10 years back from today, what has been the journey of, I don't think combating is the right word, but navigating those insecurities?
Well, I think to some degree those insecurities have resolved themselves a bit, right? The first, couple years of not having a father around, I then started to lean into my adoptive family. So I did have a father around, or a father figure, I should say, around, and a mother figure around. So things, were this kind of peak and valley, if you will, of losing my father. And then a couple of years thereafter, I was integrated into a traditional, if there is even such a thing, traditional family nucleus and group. And so those really resolve themselves in a lot of ways. I think I also started embracing and actually loving this, I'm different and I don't need to belong here. I am here and I'm part of what is here. Therefore, I just inherently belong. And this craving of belonging was not undermined, but somewhat undermined by this confidence in being me and leaning into authenticity. And not to say that by any means I've mastered it or,
Sure.
wow, I'm on the other side now and I'm so enlightened. But it's something that I continue to, especially in the last few years, learn how to lean into authenticity as much as possible. And that process is one where I had to defeat this. I need to belong. And that craving of need to belong creates the chasm of I don't belong.
Yeah.
And so once I got rid of the I need to belong, I could lean into authenticity, which I think is a beautiful superpower.
I love that. I love that because, what I was going to ask you was, when you started to embrace and realize that you were different. And clearly, that's an important part of the journey. One more question to that phase of life that I think is important that we discuss is, what was it like going from having an absent mother to not having, a mother around for 5 years to not having a mother figure back? Because the mother figure plays a very important role in all of our lives, whether or not they are present. And so was there, you talk about the ease of assimilating into this new familial structure. And I'm sure a lot of that has to do with the fact that your adoptive parents were incredible people and they made it easy for you. But, I have to ask, was there any sort of adjustment or was there any sort of internal dialogue going on around the fact that, all right, I have a mom again,
I think that I was so focused on just being 16 and getting my license and playing basketball and hanging out with my friends and playing football on
Sure.
Fridays with some of my best friends that I didn't even really, I was so not focused on it
Yeah.
that it wasn't even something I just didn't think about it.
Yeah.
And I think that process of a parental figure or not is something I still continue to figure out and
Yeah.
lean into, right? And it looks different now. So it's definitely still something I am always working through, just given the first, 16, 18 years. But in the moment when I was 16 or 18, I didn't even know what that meant. I didn't even I was just focused on get good grades and get to college because that's the next step. And I was just laser on that, and the rest kind of just happened around me. I didn't even have the awareness to really know, and candidly, the the bandwidth. Like my number one priority was get good grades, go to university, then on to the next thing, right? And I was like very action oriented and very focused on that, and didn't even think about all these other honestly, probably more important things in some ways. Things they just happened around me from the beautiful people that I was, grateful and blessed to have in my life at that point.
Well, then how about now? When you think about and now where you are, we talked about, the takeaways and the impact of your biological father and what those 5 years, did to kind of leave an impression on you and how to handle yourself as an adult, as a male, and as a person who's leading his life. What has been the impact of your adoptive mother and father over the last decade? How would you characterize it?
I would characterize it as life-changing. I'm not sure that's the exact right term, but I would characterize it as, they've given me so much and they've poured so much into me. And I'm sure if they were here with me talking about it, they'd say I've also poured back. And that actually speaks to the thing that they've given me, which I like to think is this deep compassion and this deep empathy and this deep, internal true wisdom of other humans. And I think that in my role now, that's one of my superpowers is empathy and a deep knowingness and wisdom and ability to connect with others. And I think that is undoubtedly something that they have imparted upon me. And how did they impart that upon me? Well, they demonstrated it with me.
Yeah.
They had deep empathy and knowingness and trusting us immediately. The background there is, right, they didn't really know me before this experience.
Yeah.
They'd met me a couple times. I'd come over for dinner once, but they didn't really know me. And so they have continued to impart upon me, and I can just in my mind see them, being, because they're also extremely humble.
Yeah.
And so that's another thing that they've, and probably still need to instill a little bit in me is that humbleness.
Well, the truth of the matter is when you're in their situation and where you were at 16, like they took a shot on you, essentially. And one of the brighter spots about all this and how I think about it is, they taught you the value of betting on people and believing in people and leading with that compassion, leading with that empathy, because it works, because clearly it worked with you, right? Like, they employed that on you and you saw the impact that it had on you, on your life. And, granted, if you had stayed, with your brother, your life probably would have been okay. It would have been difficult, but it probably would have been okay based on what you shared. It, probably would not have been ideal, but, you weren't going to be, doesn't sound like you were going to be homeless. It doesn't sound like you were going to be, in a dire situation, but, they led with their actions. And, I think one of the things that I want the audience to kind of take away from this and kind of hearing your story is the fact that compassion works. It really works. Like, and that's, I think one of the most important takeaways probably, I think, from our entire conversation. And I think that even in my few conversations with you, like I said from the beginning, there's something different about you. And I think it radiates through you. And I can only imagine, how it impacts your relationship with stakeholders in your day to day. So I want to make sure I call that out for you, because I think, now that we've kind of shared a lot of that backstory, we can dive into, where things went for you as you kind of now started to enter adulthood. So talk to me about college life, and even navigating your way to college.
Yeah, college was a wonderful, next beautiful experience for me, where I was fortunate enough to have a college counselor that donated their time. They'd kind of heard about my story in the community, and it was one that was different so they were really, really kind and empathetic, and donated that time and leaned in and helped me figure out a universe of colleges to apply to. And I had no idea, right? I was going into it being like, I guess I kind of want these things in state, out of state. So we just kind of applied to a bunch of stuff, right?
Sure.
I was gung-ho on going to Brown. That was a big school for me, and the Ivies, and I really was chasing that. My grades were in a place to do that. And then I had all these different extracurriculars and basketball team and president of this and all those things. So I was like, oh, okay, I think I'm like gearing up to do that thing.
Yeah.
And I applied to all those universities. And one of the first ones that got back to me was USC. And I'm not sure USC would love me for saying this, but I got this package in the mail and I had forgotten that I applied. I didn't remember I applied. And so I got this package in the mail. It was like this thick package. And my sister sent me a photo of it. I'll never forget that. And she goes, oh, I got this mail from USC. And at the time, everyone's like, it's January, February, which I think is, I can't remember exactly, but it's very early for college.
That's like early decision time.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, I applied to these guys in like November, right? Because my college counselor, who was wonderful, told me, hey, you need to get this in, this early deadline, and it qualifies you for some extra things. And I was like, okay, great. So I had my Common App essay and I did it. And I get this big package in the mail and I open it. It's like, oh, welcome to USC. And I'm like, oh, wow, I got into USC. That's really, really cool. That's awesome. And I was like, okay, but I'm also waiting to hear back from Northwestern and Brown and all these different places that I thought I was really interested in going to. And then in the side of the portfolio that they had sent me was this letter that said, hey, and oh, by the way, you're nominated for this trustee scholarship. And I was like, I don't even know what that means, right? But apparently I have to fly down to LA and I have to do this interview thing and all this stuff. What the heck is going on? So I end up going down to LA and my adopted father came with me, which is a beautiful trip. I'll never forget that. And I did this interview and ended up being qualified and nominated for this scholarship at USC. And they put on the song and dance there with the band and walking on campus, and it's, everyone's out on the lawn, loving the sun and all these things. And I was like, this seems like the perfect next step. I get to go here and once again be different, be on scholarship. And there were some privileges that I'm grateful for that came with that. And so I leaned in and I said, this is where I'm going to school. And I think I even rescinded some of my applications just to be hopefully kind to others to say, hey, I'm not really interested anymore. So I'll just rescind my application or leave a spot for someone else. And then I was off to LA.
Amazing.
And college was a wonderful experience. I think it is not an experience for everyone. So I have some contrarian perspectives there, but it was one that was good for me for all the, turbulence that happened in my first 18 years. 18 to 22 were wonderful in that I was thrust into this community where I was the same. I was in a dorm room. Everyone was in a dorm room. I was like, oh wait, now we're all the same now. And I don't have to figure out this chasm that is my identity versus the identity of the community that I belong to. And I got really engaged with the entrepreneurship school, ended up being a TA there for a professor, really leaned in and had some other projects that I worked on where I scraped the entire USC registration to help this professor get their course filled. And there's some kind of businessy school hacky things that I stumbled my way into. And it was so much fun. I met some of my best friends, who I continue to stay in touch with. And it gave me this newfound identity of being what was a little bit more of a prominent figure within the business school at USC to lean into versus a different identity that I had previously come from at 18.
Yeah. Your adoptive father was a prominent businessman. So, without going into detail, obviously, how much influence did he have when it came to your passion for the world of entrepreneurship and business?
I think when he came in my life, it was not that it was too late, but it was something I had already leaned into. Right. So when I was young, my passion for business, I think was one of self-actualization. And, I was the kid doing the car washing business, and I enrolled 3 or 4 other neighborhood kids as almost like an MLM to go do car washing and did that whole thing. And there were a variety of ways. Whenever we had the school competition where you had to sell the magazines, I was at every door. I even did that with Halloween candy. I was like, I'm gonna hit every door and get all the candy I can. And that was how I was geared. And I think my dad instilled in that for me from a young age. So that's where that thread of entrepreneurship and business came from. And I think it was also one of control, something I could control.
Yeah.
And a lot of my life wasn't something I was in control of, and I could control that. And then from there, it evolved into operating in this suit and tuxedo shop, which was a small group of 5, and I knew the owner, and I was able to have impact there and help grow the business and lean in. And then, as I'd kind of mentioned earlier, it was one of, I need to figure out how to put gas in my car. So I overnight stood up a basketball training company and started training youth in our community, 2 or 3 at a time. Not that I was by any means the most qualified basketball coach, right? I was a high school basketball player, but I was doing my best and providing, if anything, at least an hour of joy for the athlete and some reprieve for the parents, at least as they told me.
Yeah.
So I leaned into that business, leaned into a ticket sales business as well that allowed me functionally just to put gas in my car. There were days where I would be texting someone, hey, do you want these tickets or do you want this thing? And I would take the $40 I got here and I'd go straight to there were days I didn't know if I was going to get back to Gilroy, and I was supposed to be down there for dinner, and I'd go take it to the gas station, put $40 in, and that was my path to Gilroy. And that's not even sensationalized. That's truly what happened for me.
Yeah. Wow. No, I mean, that'll do it, right? That'll kind of, that back against the wall versus, what I really liked what you said around the fact that, you wanted that control because you hadn't had it for a lot of your life. And I think that in hearing your story, it makes so much sense. The question is, over time, you probably started to realize like how much control you wanted, and you needed to figure out ways to moderate it, right? Like you needed to figure, because, especially in a role like you're in today, you're in a very collaborative environment, right? And you need to cede some of that control.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that things happen for a reason. And as we're going to kind of build up to how you got to Superpower, one of the things that, I can't help but think about now is like, you're clearly built for the role that you're in now. And kind of hearing you talk about that control element earlier on, especially in a partnership role, there's a lot of give and take there. And, just in the phrase give and take, you realize that control has to be shared. So talk to me about how your journey early on in your career kind of evolves as it pertains to that word, control.
That's a great question. I think, so when I left USC and did what a lot of great business schools will tell you to do, right? Go into investment banking, private equity, or consulting.
Yep.
And those are great careers.
Yep.
Nothing against those careers. And I chose consulting, right? So ended up at a consulting firm for quite a few years. Long story short, was deeply unhappy in the world of consulting, or deeply unfulfilled, right? I was put in a position where I wasn't very personally drawn to the work that I was doing. It wasn't mission oriented for me. I also saw other people loving it because it's also something other people might love, but I wasn't. And I knew there was a misalignment there. And so that was a moment where I didn't have control. I was part of this large consulting firm, kind of getting the accolades, making the way through promotions and all the things that keep you there.
Yeah.
But realized this is not what's calling me. This is not my purpose. This is not who I am. This is just checking a box.
Yeah.
And so in that moment, to answer your question, I didn't have much control. So what I started doing is figuring out, okay, well, I have some savings that I built up from my previous businesses. And even though I spent some of it in college, as we do. And I said, well, what I control is the ways I can have impact out in the community.
Yeah.
Right. So I was thinking about, okay, well, how do I start doing this angel investment thing? Right. So a company would come across that either I knew the person or I saw them, thought they were doing was cool. I'd reach out, have a conversation, stumble my way into what that looked like. And that's what I could control, what I was doing with those dollars.
Yeah.
And so I was doing that for a while, hadn't made any investments. And then as we'll get to, I'm sure, made my first in Superpower, and that was my first foray into Superpower, and was my mechanism of like, I can control this thing. This other experience I'm having in consulting, I'll figure that out, but I can control this thing over here, and that's how I thought of it.
Yeah.
And even since my childhood, I've thought a lot about control.
Yeah.
Right. It isn't something, I think for a while it was something I wanted to have all the time, and then I realized, oh wait, I've really never had it at all.
Yeah.
And I think there was that realization of like, there's only actually so much you can even control anyway.
Yeah.
Once you realize that, and it was actually my adoptive father that had kind of talked to me about that, about you really have less control than you think. The moment you think you're controlling everything is the moment you fooled yourself. Then I realized that. And so I was much more comfortable being like, well, there's so much I don't control. I don't need to try and convince myself I can control so much. But tactically, exerting control meant exerting my ability to start angel investing out in the market.
I love that. And it's so true. And I love that, your adoptive father gave you that insight, because I think it's one of the most important, profound, and repeated pieces of insight, not just on this show, but on many platforms around, like, when it comes down to control, it's really important to understand what actually is controllable, and then leaning into that, and then letting everything else be. And if you try, obviously, to overexert your control, that's going to generally backfire on you. When you think about some of the angel investments that you were making, talk to me a little bit about what you are looking for, as an investor.
The number one thing I was always looking for, and I'm not sure that I've codified this until years later. I didn't necessarily know I was looking for it at the time.
Yeah.
Number one was mission alignment and orientation.
Sure.
Is this individual founder or team, group of founders or team wholeheartedly dedicated to a mission?
Yeah.
That when some bump in the road, some turbulence comes up, that is going to be the North Star.
Yeah.
Beyond, and especially because I was angel investing, I was getting in early in the cycle. I wasn't worried about really, I was concerned with focusing on industries that I felt like I had a unique value add to some degree.
Sure.
And I was just, my personal mission was aligned to. But when I looked at deals, it was, is this person driven to a mission? And if you're driven on that mission, the rest will start to take care of itself. The team will come because of the authenticity that you bring to the mission. The dollars will come in one capacity or another, or they won't, and you'll figure out what that looks like because you're wholeheartedly dedicated to this North Star.
Yeah.
And so above all else, it was clarity and personal connection to a mission, not just dedication to it, but how is this person actually, is it this mission over here that they're like, oh, this calls to me, or is it this mission here that is who I am? And that's what I was always looking for.
Yeah. How do you reconcile between an organization or a company with a mission that you really like, and still being able to look at the founder, the CEO, the leader, and determine if they are the right person to lead this mission? And I say this, and maybe this is kind of like a strange way of asking the question. All the investments that I've made have been more so led by my belief in the founder to drive, the mission that I believed in, less so than my belief in the mission. And then go to the founder. You got what I'm saying? So I always started with the founder.
Yep.
Granted, I would not invest in something whose mission I did not believe in, but I always started with the founder. Do you start with the mission before the founder, or the founder before the mission?
It's a good question, and not to give you a third answer, but sort of neither. I start with the founder's orientation and association to the mission. So it's almost the marriage of the two.
Yeah.
Not to say that it's founder first, then mission, or mission first, then founder. It's actually, in some ways, founder first, but founder first in the context of orientation to mission. I always say that I think most people, if not everyone, are 4 or 5 steps away from mission, right? I do this thing so that this thing can happen, so this thing can happen, so this thing can happen, so the world's a better place.
Yeah.
And I think you can, anything that you think of, you can orient yourself 4 steps to mission. For me, the fewer steps that are in between a founder and delivering on the mission, that's a massive, massive piece for me, right? The fewer steps that are there, the more confident I'm in, among many other things that I'll take into consideration depending on, stage and those types of things. And I have a lot to learn in the space. There's no doubt about that. But that was my early understanding, was more focus on the human and what drove them. What are their incentives? And are they 1 step for mission or 4 steps, right? 4 steps is okay. I think especially as you get later stage and you're scaling, you might have to be 4 steps because that's what the business needs at the time. But I think early on, with as much turbulence and pivots that are needed and just yuckiness that really comes up in the early days, you have to be so married and personally connected in your soul to that mission. And at the end of the day, that's what I saw in Superpower early on.
Agreed. I love that. That is such an important takeaway, and something that I think a lot of people should consider, because you're right. It doesn't have to be one or the other. So Superpower in particular, right? Like, this is a really unique scenario where not only are you now laying your money on the line, you started to realize that, this is more than just an investment. This is something that you believe in, deeply, something that you want to be a part of, something that you could find purpose within. So talk to me about, that initial realization, and speak to the audience a little bit about, what the mission is, just to educate them. And how easy of a decision was it for you to say, I'm going to go deeper than just, make an investment here?
It's a great question. So from a mission perspective, we're wholeheartedly focused on unlocking proactive, performance-oriented care for all, right? And there's numbers that you can associate with that. There's scope. But at the end of the day, we are focused on delivering what we call a super app, a platform that enables people to engage with their health in that performance-oriented way. That's going to materialize and look different over time, but that's where we're really wholeheartedly focused. Now, your question around voting, and I call it kind of voting with my dollars first and then voting with my feet. And the feet are more important to me than the dollars, right? Because there's dollars to share, and I'm grateful for that, but I've only got 2 feet. And so it's a massive decision, right? And for me, it was one that came from a very, very personal place, right? I've had my own turbulence with my health. I've watched others around me have turbulence with their health. And I've also observed a system that, in my experience, hasn't been fully capable of handling that. I'll call it turbulence. I think we've built a really, really strong system to react and respond. You go to you have a broken arm, go to urgent care. You have this chronic condition and you need a pharmaceutical to quickly solve it. I think the westernized medical system is really, really good at that. And it's obvious as to why we focus there. That's where the hair on fire problem is, right? Someone's going to die. We need to fix it now. That makes sense. And now we have this beautiful luxury of starting to invest early on, such that the hair on fire problems don't happen as often. And for me, I watched a lot of, number one, hair on fire problems be handled in certain ways that I don't necessarily agree with, and everyone has a different opinion. And the fact that, was it really a hair on fire problem? Or were there, all these other pieces that we maybe could have taken care of upstream, even while the hair was on fire? Could we have taken care of upstream that would have helped prevent or even after the fact ameliorate the hair being on fire? So that's our mission, and a little bit of why one of the reasons it means so much to me.
It's a mission that a lot of people are trying to kind of put together now and trying to figure out a way to navigate. And if I think about even on this show, over the last 15 episodes, we've had several people who are attacking this mission from different angles. And so one of the things that stands out about Superpower in particular is you guys have drawn a lot of attention. You guys have a lot of ears and a lot of eyes on you in short time. What makes you different?
So there's something we've really leaned into is brand and community. When people ask me the question, what makes us different? There's all sorts of product features I can go into of we have this and they don't have that, but what I actually think that is all almost irrelevant.
Yeah.
Compared to the brand that we've built and will continue to build. We are leaning into building a culturally resonant, consumer-oriented brand that is, dare I say, fun. I'm not wearing one now, but we have the Superpower hoodies, right? We have the Superpower water bottles. We have all sorts of ways that people can actually engage with this and view it as a lifestyle, view it as part of their identity, view it as a way of being, and view it as a way of being with others.
Yeah.
And I think that's what's really different, right? I think people have built sexy brands in wellness, 100%. There's a handful out there that we all know. There's people that have built great brands in wellness, right? I think Othership and what Robbie's doing in New York are also massive fan of what they're doing. Yep. And I'll be going to Othership on this week while I'm here.
I was just there.
And it's
highly recommend.
Yeah, I couldn't recommend it more. I think what they're doing is also talk about authenticity. I could talk for hours about that, about what he's doing. And how in awe I am of it.
And he's actually coming on the show. So
there you go.
Preview for everybody.
Oh, okay. And, but I think that's what makes us different, right? Nobody's out there wearing unless you work there, a Blue Cross Blue Shield hoodie or a Kaiser hoodie. It isn't exciting. And it makes sense as to why it's not exciting. When you think of going to the doctor, it isn't an exciting experience.
No.
It's something is wrong. I need to fix it now. And it might be really scary, the news I hear about.
Yeah. Because
that is our relationship to healthcare. One of problem, solution, reaction, right? And we're flipping that on its head from a product perspective in a lot of ways with the proactive modalities that we have and the way we've engineered our digital platform. But we're also flipping that on its head from a brand and culture perspective. And I think that to me is what's resonated more in the market than we have this feature or that feature, and that's why we resonate because we have this thing. There are those things, but we focus a lot more on the brand that we're building as going back to my earlier point, we don't need to belong, right?
Well, one of the cool things about just hearing you speak is what you're doing sounds like a very positive movement, as opposed to when a lot of people speak to this, it feels like a battle, right? Like, what you're doing is yes, in a way you are going to war against, traditional healthcare, but you're not leading that way. You're leading with, building culture and growing a movement around something everyone wants, as opposed to focusing on, the fight, which in a way kind of like people get tired of fighting. Not, and the more, and in a way, they don't even want to affiliate with fighting because it's tiring. So if you kind of go at it from, the element of creating and cultivating and empowering and growing, it's a lot more welcoming than, than saying our mission is to tear down the traditional healthcare system.
Well, and the thing that's coming up for me as you say that is my understanding, at least, of a fight is there's a winner and a loser. And I don't view what we're doing as having a winner and a loser. I think that what's been built to date is good in its own way. Yeah. It solves a lot of things. It saved a lot of lives, the system that we have. And it's done exactly what we need it to, which is respond to all these fires that are burning right away. Don't talk about how they're starting yet. Yeah. Just put them out. Yeah. That's great. And I don't think that my thought isn't to fight and like there's a winner and loser of this. It's one of opportunity, one of love, where we're building a community, and that has seemed to resonate, and that has resonated with a large group of people.
When you think about the mission and everything that you guys are doing right now, what's your biggest obstacle these days?
I think our biggest obstacle is one that the industry at large is facing, right? Which is, I always liken it, the analogy to, car maintenance and a car mechanic, right? Where most people are driving down the road with their car's never broken down. and they don't do any proactive maintenance on it. And then someone comes along and says, hey, I know your car has never broken down, but I promise you it's going to. And oh, by the way, to not have that happen, you're going to pay me. And we're going to do these oil change things that you know nothing about, by the way. You don't know how to change your own oil. You don't know how to do all these things, but I'm telling you they're important. And this your timing belt, go replace that. And you don't even know what that is. And so there's this esoteric translation from a mechanic to this person about, hey, you should be doing these things. I promise you should. And oh, by the way, give me money now.
Yeah.
And this person goes, my car's never broken down. What are you talking about? And that's the same challenge that we face in this proactive, preventative, performance-oriented care world of, hey, your car might not have broken down yet, but we're going to do things to help make sure that it doesn't. And that long-term thinking in health has started to permeate, right? And I think our drives to moving our bodies more and sleeping better and eating right. And I think all those things are happening and they're wonderful. And when in a lot of ways we're building on the shoulders of those things. And that's our biggest hurdle is communicating that. I think for anyone in the space, not really just us, but anyone in the space, is communicating that value narrative of like, you should do this investment early and often now, even though it may materialize immediately. We may find something that you didn't know was going on. And that's a certain conversation. And then there's also you should just be doing this as a good hygiene practice, as just like you brush your teeth, because a cavity is going to come up. And so I think it's changing the mental model of how we engage with our health, right? When we talk about our product or any other product in the market, it's one of, well, don't I already do that, or why? And it's changing that value system where people are just ingrained to think reaction. I have a cold, I go get a strep throat test, I go get my antibiotics. That is health right now. That is the doctor.
Yeah.
And it's completely flipping that narrative on its head to say, yes, that, and let's all do these other things to make sure that your immune system is strong so you don't get the strep throat.
Yeah.
But I think that in order to do that, that takes time, that takes culture building, that takes community. And that's why we're so focused on doing that, because I think it's that shift in thinking, and actually that deep shift in culture. When you look at the rest of the United States, right? In the major metros, that is a shift that is already happening. No doubt. No doubt, right? I'm based in San Francisco. We're here in New York. These are the major metros that are shifting that way. There's other ship here in Remedy Place and all these wonderful places doing it. But you look at the rest of the US, and it's going to take a movement, a culture, a community to do that. Not just the powerful product, which we have a powerful product, but it's not just a really, really strong mechanic. It's a community of people being like, I go to the mechanic, and I go to the mechanic, and I go to the mechanic, and I change my oil. Oh, wow, okay, maybe I should too. Not just, oh, wow, he's really effective at doing it. And you're like, at doing what? I don't even know what he does.
I'm laughing because my car's at the auto body shop as we speak.
Well,
so
there you go. There you go.
Yeah. So and I had that phone call yesterday and did not understand.
It's not. Exactly.
So
and then you have to. So yeah,
and then you just have to say yes, and you'll deal with it later.
And it's the same. I mean, there's philosophical musings I can go into on this, but it's the same like esoteric brokerage of information where you're like, I don't know what it means to change out, my catalytic converter because it's not passing smog, et cetera. But you have to have someone you trust. And that's at the end of the day what we're doing by building community, by building culture, is by building trust. And people have to trust. And that's something that there's data obviously to back it, but there's a really significant steep decline and lack of trust with healthcare today. And that's one of our most important, if not one of the most important things that we have in this time on this planet.
Absolutely. And, one of the most important differentiators now of anyone trying to lead something like this is the realization that in today's age, you're not selling a product. You're selling a feeling. You're selling an emotion. You're selling that community, right? Because that's what people want. People want to feel that feeling that they are a part of something important. They want that emotion of knowing that they're not alone in recognizing that, in this case, the area of healthcare could be improved. And, there are areas of improvement, and that they're not alone in seeing that. Like I'm not crazy. We're not crazy, right? Like we're not crazy for saying this. And for years, people have been calling out, where the gaps are, and to feel like there's a coalition working together with one unified mission towards solving it is it's a great feeling. And ultimately that's, I think, why, there's buy-in and why there will continue to be buy-in. Albe, I just want to say, thank you. Thank you for all this, man. I mean, as we round things out here, I think about where your journey began, and I think about the lack of clarity that you had for nearly the decade to kick off your life. And then I think about how you had to navigate the ups and downs of some of your most important developmental years between, let's call it, the age of 10 and 20. And how you've kind of taken that lack of control plus, the initial dysfunction, and also the coupling of lessons from your biological father, along with, quickly adapting to a new situation in an adoptive home at the age of 16, and then being able to be aware enough in your adult life to not only invest, but then, like you said, put both your feet into something that you believe in, speaks incredibly highly of the kind of individual that you are. And, I think that as we close things out here, I'd want to give you the floor really quick to talk about how you look back on your own story and how you reflect on it as you continue to build, not only from, the perspective of Superpower, but as an individual.
Well, thank you. When I reflect on my experience here on this planet, it's one of consistent and deep gratitude. I'm grateful for this experience that I was given in my first 16 years. It's a kind of an interesting thing to say, or different thing to say, that I wouldn't want it to be any different. Just kind of odd thing to say, but I wouldn't. It gave me the opportunity to build this deeper relationship with my aunt and uncle, and have this different relationship with, my adoptive parents. And it gave me so much. And so when I think back to that experience, it's one of consistent and deep gratitude for the opportunity and for all of the people that surrounded me in it, right? And to my earlier point, I think there's a big focus on I, and I did these things, and I was so resilient. For me, it's not that. There was this village around me that I am representative of, that coalition and collage of people. And so when I reflect back on it, it's one of deep gratitude. It's one of, I'm humbled by the fact that I was even given this opportunity, whether it was in my childhood or really now at Superpower. I'm humbled by the notion that I get to be part of our founding team and moving this mission forward and having this impact. So it's one of, the through line for all of it for me is gratitude. And consistently continuing to lean into gratitude, to not get caught up in the the vanity or anything that can start coming our way as we expand and amplify impact. That's where I'm most focused on, is consistently leaning into gratitude in a really big way. And there's all sorts of other things I could talk about. There's the resilience that kind of was thrust upon me being in the fire. There's the persistence that I was taught in those moments. There's the kind of deep empathy that others imparted upon me, that I think allows me to connect with a multitude or spectrum of individuals and relate, because I do have experiences all up and down along this crazy world.
Yeah.
And ability to actually genuinely empathize versus sympathize. So, yeah, I think it's just one of deep gratitude for those experiences, for the team that we have at Superpower, and for the opportunity to be here and to share all of it.
Amazing. Albe, thank you so much for coming on Mile 40, for leaving us with so much to reflect on, to take away from this. Like I've said from the beginning, man, you're a special human, and I'm grateful to have you on the show. So thanks for coming on.
Yep, I appreciate you. You got it.